Legislative Conference SLC webinar entitled Public-Private Partnerships and the SLC States, Recent Developments. I am Sujit Kanagaretna, Fiscal Policy Manager for the Southern Legislative Conference, the Southern Office of the Council of State Governments here in Atlanta. I want to thank our distinguished panelists for setting aside time from their very busy schedules to be here with us today and for providing us with the latest information on P3 trends in Florida, Virginia, and Texas. Before we delve into the webinar, I'd like to take care of a few housekeeping items. You are all in listen-only mode. If you wish to ask a question, please use the question box on your GoToWebinar toolbar. You may type in a question at any time during the webinar, and we will get to them at the end. We will be recording this webinar and posting it on the CSG Knowledge Center website, knowledgecenter.csg.org, and the SLC website, slcatlanta.org. In an effort to develop alternate funding sources to implement critical transportation and infrastructure projects, states across the country are increasingly looking to public-private partnerships, or P3s, as an important strategy in advancing essential transportation and infrastructure goals. P3s are contractual agreements between a public agency and a private entity, facilitating a more robust private sector role, including the design, construction, finance, long-term operation, and traffic revenue for these transportation and infrastructure projects. With encouragement from the federal government, some 36 states have enacted authorization frameworks for P3s. Several SLC states have been particularly active in pursuing the P3 format for a number of years, and this webinar will provide the latest perspectives, approaches, and experiences from Florida, Virginia, and Texas. We are honored to have with us this afternoon an eminent panel of experts to address a number of issues related to P3s. Our first presenter is Leon Corbin, Project Finance Manager for the Florida Department of Transportation. He leads the team responsible for the financial development of P3s and other major project advancements. Since joining the department in 2008, Leon has helped advance the I-595 corridor improvements, Port of Miami Tunnel, and I-4 availability payment P3s, as well as a number of design, build, finance P3s. I staffed a delegation of SLC legislators that received briefings on Florida's notable multimodal capabilities last week, and we visited both the Port of Miami Tunnel and the I-594 corridor improvement projects. The delegation was most impressed with both projects. Our second presenter is Douglas Coleman, the Director of the Virginia Office of Public-Private Partnerships, a position he was appointed to by Governor Terry McAuliffe in January 2014. Doug brings 4 decades of experience in business, government, and community relations to his current position. More than 20 years ago, Doug worked on the effort that sparked the adoption of TIFIA, private activity bonds, and other alternate financing tools in transportation. Our final presenter is Russell Zapalak, Chief Planning and Project Officer at the Texas Department of Transportation, or TxDOT. His duties include oversight of TxDOT planning, environmental, rail, transit, and maritime activities, as well as leading TxDOT's $27 billion alternate delivery and public-private partnership program. Each presentation this afternoon will last for about 15 minutes. Please feel free to submit your questions as they come up throughout the program, and we will try to answer as many as we have time at the end. Leon, you have the floor.
Thank you, Sujit, and thank you to the Southern Legislative Conference for having us today. And I'm really honored to be joined with Virginia and Texas as well. I think you'll get a good representation of the P3s in the South and some of the leaders in P3s in the different states. So I'm going to start actually just with our legislative framework, and you can advance to the next slide. And I think it's just maybe important to start here because really if you don't have the authority, clear authority and statute to do P3s, you may run into some obstacles. And I give credit to the Florida legislature back in 2007 or so. They really did some good things to not only give us the authority to do P3s, but some steps that put controls in place and offer assurance to our private sector partners that provide credit worthiness to our P3 program. And so I mentioned that we have some controls in place, and so one of those things we refer to as the 15% cap. But that does limit the amount of funding we can allocate to P3s in any given year. And I think that just gives people some comfort that we aren't going out and overdoing the P3s. In Florida, we're really focused on key projects that make the most sense to do a public-private partnership. Another key thing that they did in 2007 was give us the authority to do availability payment deals. And I'll probably get into a little bit more detail on the availability payments later in the presentation, but Florida was the first in 2008 and 2009 to award an availability payment type of P3 and close the deal with the I-595 project, and also the Port of Miami Tunnel project followed shortly after. And so that was a unique thing that we did, and the timing actually turned out to be perfect. Availability payments one thing they do is take the toll risk out of the deal for the private sector. So again, I'll get in a little bit more detail about that shortly. Some more recent controls that have put in place include requiring approval by the governor in the legislative review before we move forward with the project. That was done in 2012. And I just highlight that again because if you've paid attention to some P3s throughout the country or even internationally, you see that political risk is a concern out there. And so what this does is basically we get the blessing to move forward. It's official before we start a procurement. And again, I think this is a good thing overall for the private sector as well as the public sector, because you're providing some assurance that the state is serious about the P3 and moving forward with the procurement with the hopes of closing the deal on a set schedule. So one other control I'll mention is that, with availability payments, it is something that we consider in Florida to be sort of like debt. And so we have a statewide debt affordability report. So in addition to that 15% cap, we also have some measures in place to make sure we aren't overcommitting future funds for our availability payments. Next slide. And so this is just a summary of the P3s we've done in the state, showing you where they're located. And we've done 3 different kinds of P3s. We have short-term build finance or design build finance P3s that are simply advancing projects that are typically in our 5-year work program, but advancing them to today. So maybe you had some funding spread out over the next 2 or 3 years, let's say in the 5-year work program. Well, the design build finance approach allows us to go ahead and procure that today and then pay out the P3 per a set cash availability schedule. So that's been one approach to, again, just advance priority projects. The bigger effort that I want to focus on more today, and what is typically more of interest to people, is the design, build, finance, operate, maintain P3. And so we've had 3 of those in Florida. I mentioned 595, the Port of Miami Tunnel. Both of those in South Florida were executed in 2009, went through the construction period, and pretty much open to the traveling public on schedule. And Sujit mentioned that he had made a visit recently to see those in operation. So we're now enjoying a couple of the fruits of our labors of doing P3s and advancing those projects early. And then our most recent one is the I-4 Ultimate project in Orlando. Why don't we go ahead to the next slide? And I'll just show you a quick summary of one of the key benefits, obviously, with the P3 is advancing the project. And so On I-595, we looked at it and said, well, if we had kind of pieced this along in a traditional fashion, segment by segment, it would have taken us probably 15 years more to deliver the P3. Look at the Port of Miami Tunnel. The funding approach was so challenging, we never did quite figure out how long it would have taken us to do it under a traditional approach. But the P3 allowed us to advance it along with partnering with our local county and city, allowed us to advance the project. The I-4 Ultimate, I'm going to get into a little bit more detail on that one because it is a more recent project, but we basically think it would have taken us about 26 years to piece out I-4 under a traditional funding method. Under the P3, it's going to be constructed in 6 years. And then just a summary of our other design, build, finance, and build finance projects. Like I said earlier, typically those are advanced between 1 and 5 years, probably usually 2 or 3 years on average, and we've done about $2.5 billion of those types of projects. Next slide. So when we focus on the design, build, finance, operate, maintain, and again in Florida, those have been availability payment deals. There's some key goals we're looking at. We're looking to obviously transfer some risk to the private sector, and that's typically done by having a set price on the construction, a set time frame that they can deliver the project, and there's some other risks that we can get into more detail on I-4. I think we have a slide we'll share on that. But clearly accelerating the project, timetable. In Florida, we do a competitive procurement, and through that competition, we see a very competitive environment with typically a wide range of bids, and we see cost savings there. We also see cost savings by combining multiple segments of projects, and so there are efficiencies that you can gain by advancing the project. Also, by advancing it to today's present-day costs, you can save on what would be inflation costs. If you had to deliver it through a traditional method, you would be seeing future costs rising over time as you wait for funds to be available. And clearly, there is innovation both through the competition that's involved in the way the P3 is set up to allow the concessionaire to not only build the project, design it, build it, but operate it and maintain it. And through that, you find innovations. Next slide. So I mentioned I would get into a little bit more detail on I-4. We just recently closed this deal in September and spent about 18 months or so going through the procurement on it. And this was our first project that we had to go through the governor approval and legislative review process. So what did we have to do? We had to really sell the story for why the P3 was the way to go. And the first place we started was, well, what's the benefit of the project? Well, the I-4 project is a highly congested area in Orlando, and I'm sure most of you would be aware, Orlando is a major tourism center for Florida. And so this project actually goes through downtown Orlando, and it's very limited areas within the work. So we're trying to add lanes and manage congestion and maintain traffic flow during the construction. And so one of the things we're doing to alleviate the congestion is adding express lanes. We're adding a total of 4 express lanes, 2 in each direction. We're also adding auxiliary lanes and reconstructing a number of major interchanges and a tremendous number of bridges. So what we have is a very complex project, trying, like I said, not to do it over a long period of time, and the P3 was the decided method to move it forward. Let's go to the next slide. So we also, again, shared the benefits of the project, and clearly we were able to demonstrate that, per FHWA's numbers, we're generating a lot of jobs immediately. With the I-4 project, we had infrastructure that was aging, and we had bridges that were going to need to be replaced soon anyway. So we were able to just demonstrate the benefit of the modern infrastructure that would go in. There were also currently safety issues with I-4, again designed in the 1960s, built in the 1960s. Things have changed since then. So we're going to deliver a much safer project. I've talked about the congestion and adding the express lanes. Again, we thought it would take 26 years to deliver it in a traditional method. Thinking of the headaches the commuters would go through, our tourists would go through, for that extended period of time wasn't really acceptable. So the idea of advancing it and doing it in 6 years was definitely a huge benefit. And another key thing was, if we tried to find other means to advance this project besides the P3, we would ultimately be deferring other projects around the state. And there are plenty of, Florida's a growing state with lots of congested areas. There are other high priority projects, and that just really wasn't possible. So that made for a good case for the P3 as well. Next slide. I mentioned earlier that one of our goals is to transfer risk, and so with I-4 we definitely, again, after evaluation, found that to be the case, that when you look at the design and construction costs for those would be locked in, but also the long-term operations and maintenance costs. The availability payment method, basically we're paying, we set a payment that we're going to pay the concessionaire a maximum annual availability payment, and they earn that payment based on their performance. So they have to keep the lanes open, they have set times for lane closures. If there's a breakdown in the median, let's say, they have so much time to clear it, and they have to reach those performance levels to earn the full availability payment. And so that gave us certainty on our long-time costs for not only O&M, operations and maintenance, but also things like resurfacing costs, things that we've seen over time can be very volatile. The availability payment structure allowed us to lock in a set price. And so I-4 is a very complicated project, 21 miles again, and so at one point we're going to have 500 designers working on the project, and there are many utility conflicts within the project. The concessionaire is responsible for that. If the scope is enhanced in any way, and there are some scope enhancements that the winning bidder proposed, then they would have to go through any reevaluation on that with FHWA. And again, if the costs rise, that the I-4 Mobility Partners, the concessionaire, is at risk. Next slide. So just to maybe summarize some of the lessons we've learned, Florida now doing 3 availability payment deals. We've certainly learned a lot through the procurement process. The P3 process is pretty unique. I mean, it is a much more complicated procurement. It does require a lot more resources to get it moving, but then you're delivering a much bigger project with a much more cost-effective, we think, structure. So we've learned that you have to look at each project uniquely. The risk will be different on each project. If you think about, say, the Port of Miami tunnel and the risk associated with digging a tunnel under the Biscayne Bay versus a roadway project through downtown Orlando, you just have to look at each one differently. We have learned, particularly with 595 and the Port of Miami tunnel, that you can close a deal even during tough financial times in the markets. We were able to do that in 2009 after the the financial crisis, the economic crisis in the U.S. had happened. And I think the availability payment structure really actually helped close those deals. Not having the toll risk in the deal for the concessionaire was important at that time. Also looking at making a business case for the project, looking at the P3 and is it cost effective. Our statute actually requires us to do a cost effectiveness analysis. And another thing we do is look at value for money, just to kind of the best practice to say, okay, if we were to do this as a public sector comparator, what do we think it would hypothetically cost us? And making sure that we find that the P3 delivers value for money through risk transfer. It's always very important to look at all your stakeholders on P3s and make sure you have their support from a local perspective, making sure that the project is desired, a priority for maybe the Metropolitan Planning Organization, and then on a statewide level, again, in Florida, we're getting the governor's approval and legislative review and basically approval before we move forward with the P3. Another lesson learned is just to make sure you have the right amount of resources and expertise on the project. We've definitely worked with outside advisors on the legal, technical, and financial side, but we've also looked at a kind of a core team that works across the different P3 projects internally and builds on the past experiences. And in Florida, we're known as the Sunshine State for a couple of reasons, with our great weather, but also we have open sunshine laws that require us to be pretty transparent about what the deal entails, and we have pretty robust public record request laws. So it's important to be transparent. It's important to, when you're working with the concessionaire, have a lot of interactions back and forth. We do typically, I would say, 3 or 4 one-on-one meetings during the proposal stage of the process with each bidder, just to hear concerns on both sides. Next slide. So finally, just to kind of sum up some of the key points, I think one of the great benefits of the P3s in Florida, the experience we've had, is to be able to take high priority projects that may have funding obstacles in front of them and advance them and deliver that priority project to the traveling public. In South Florida, we're seeing the benefits on I-595, having opened express lanes on that project recently and basically rebuilt the entire corridor through our availability payment P3. We've relieved congestion in downtown Miami with the Port of Miami Tunnel project, offering truck traffic direct access to the port. A key thing to keep in mind with P3s is the burden is not just on the department to keep the project and the contractors moving on time. The concessionaire is now responsible, and they have lenders looking over their shoulder to make sure things are on time. Lenders don't like to miss out on getting repaid. So there's added pressure, added incentive. There's equity invested in the project. So that's a key point to take away on P3s, is that you're getting more certainty that things will get delivered on time and on budget. And I-4 was unique in that we were able to get some added value on that project, and I'd be happy to talk about that during the Q&A session. But I also want to mention that working with federal and local partners may be critical. Working with the TIFIA program has been critical for all our P3s. And I think my contact information is on the next slide. There's a link to our website there. You can get direct access to our statute there if that's of interest. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Sujit.
Thank you, Leon, for those insightful remarks. Doug, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. It's good to be with you. And I appreciate Leon laying out many of the characteristics and benefits of public-private partnerships. I've actually entitled my presentation based on Newton's second law of motion, that force is mass times acceleration. And we joke with our VDOT all the time that they're the mass and the Office of Public-Private Partnerships is the acceleration. So next slide. We've been a leader in this area for some time, but our first project was delivered actually under a utility model that had the State Corporation Commission having to approve tolls, for example, and that was awkward and clumsy, and that led us to our enabling legislation in 1995 that set up what is now a very workable process. We created this office in 2010 because we realized moving from project to project wasn't allowing us to actually capture the expertise as we wanted to do. So since that time, we paid attention to industry practice, changes in the political climate, and so forth. But our goal is still to build a strategic program and extend the leadership position, match our public interest with the ability to attract private financing. Next slide. These are the lessons we've learned up front, that having a permanent office gives you a champion for public-private partnerships. You can act as a catalyst for activity, and then obviously you're the guide to how you actually do it. And capturing those things is really important. I wanted to suggest, too, that who you put in your P3 office is very important. They have to have certain characteristics, pragmatic, collaborative by nature, and have vision and imagination, not just a good process, because this is change management as much as anything else. As you can see, having consistent guidelines help facilitate the process. Reviewing your assumptions throughout. For example, we'll do a value for money study at the screening stage, but when we get a final proposal, we'll run that proposal's actual numbers through the same value for money analysis to make sure all the way through that a public-private partnership is the preferred way to deliver a project. Effective communication, steady flows of information, as Leon said, are really critical. Next. The example I want to use is, next slide, is the I-95 Express Lanes project that just opened day before yesterday. It was completed in just 2 years. It's a concession project, and you can see the Virginia contribution of $71 million leveraged a $925 million project. It adds to what is now an emerging managed lane system in Northern Virginia, and eventually we hope that would expand throughout the greater Washington area. By the way, Transurban, which is the operator and the equity provider, found that the ramp-up period on 495, which is now in its 3rd year, wasn't covering debt service like they wanted, so they actually increased equity in the project to buy down the debt service to more closely match the revenues they were getting. So that's an example of the financing flexibility that the private sector can bring to this kind of project activity that's more difficult for the public sector. The next slide, please. Another project that's underway is the Elizabeth River Tunnel project. It's in the Hampton Roads area, and again, it brings the private sector's innovation to a project that was going to take VDOT many, many years, both to design and finance under our fund under traditional means. It's underway well. They're laying those, they're submerging those sections of tunnel now, and it's going to bring some relief to that greater Hampton Roads area. Next slide. Our next project that we're moving to procurement is to extend the managed lanes that were on 495 and 95 south to the I-66 project east and west through Fairfax and Prince William County. We're in the Tier 2 environmental assessment right now, preliminary engineering and so forth. We're briefing the Commonwealth's Transportation Board, our oversight board, in January, and we hope to move to an RFQ for the project in February. You can see the rest of the schedule. It's ambitious to try to shortlist teams, move to a request for proposal by the end of 2015, complete the NEPA simultaneously, and then begin construction by 2017. Next slide. This is the first project that we're going to advance under our new guidelines. You can see it involves 2 express lanes in each direction. It will allow HOV3 carpooling, and transit will travel free on the toll lanes, 3 general lanes with no tolls, And then what we're calling rapid bus service, which would give a high frequency of bus service beyond peak hours. So what people are looking for more than anything else, we found, is a reliable trip. And we think this project, by having these various components, will help deliver that. Next. When we revised our guidelines, it was a 6-month process. We had a lot of public engagement and outreach. We received over 100 formal comments over a 30-day period. And basically, it was a very positive message that people saw the P3 delivery method as really important to the future, but they did want to improve transparency, competition, and accountability, and that's what we've done. Several of the steps we took was to increase the oversight board engagement, increase public outreach and engagement, enhance competition, transparency, and improve risk assessment and management, which is very critical here. Next. So here's the highlights of some of the benefits. We align the political support for projects now up front before actual procurement begins. So you can see a steering committee provides early guidance. Our own screening and project development team works hard, and we get buy-in, if you will, from the key stakeholders right up front. The second is the oversight board actually has to approve the move from that development to procurement, and in doing so signals the general parameters of the project and the general financial arrangements that they're willing to accept. We'll be more active in notifying our legislature as we go. And if we get only a single response under the new guidelines, we have to step back and review whether or not the project procurement under a P3 is actually the best way to go, since the market hasn't really responded in a robust way. We also have a mandatory review if there are material changes in the scope, financial terms, and risk allocations through the process. Next. So our risk scenario looks sort of like this. We've already conducted an initial risk workshop this summer for I-66. It's led to an initial risk register and a risk management plan, but those things are updated at each stage all the way through the procurement, as you can see. And it's something, risk is something you have to actively assess, allocate, and manage all the way through the life of the project, not just through construction. That's a challenge for many departments of transportation who are used to seeing basically their risks end at the end of the construction itself. Next. Here's a schematic of what that that project development framework actually looks like. It's too small to actually understand here in this slide, but that's available on our website, a much bigger piece. But as you can see, the oversight board approvals come at the first 2 yellow diamonds, and the blue box underneath the second yellow diamond down is actually when procurement begins, when the private sector begins to assemble teams, spend money, and put proposals together. So we think this controls a lot of risk up front and gives confidence to the private sector about follow-through on projects. At each stage, though, you can see we're briefing assembly members, others, the public, and so forth, so that this is a very open and transparent process throughout. Next. What we're doing now is distributing this manual and guidelines widely. Our VDOT and our Department of Rail and Public Transportation have now adopted them as guidelines for their P3 projects. We're finalizing some additional sub-guides on public engagement, risk management, and value for money that will be released early in 2015. And you may be able to draw on those as resources if you're considering altering, improving, or starting a program. They spell out in quite detail about how things actually work. Next. The future of our program, this is our pipeline, if you will, similar to Florida's map, the things that we're working on. But we're really going to concentrate going forward on projects that have the true characteristics of public-private partnerships, including equity, risk sharing, the life cycle costs being included, speedier delivery, and so forth. We'll continue to review the process, and again, the goals are clearly to make it more transparent, competitive, and so forth. Next. The next big area of focus is Hampton Roads. There's a new commission there, regional commission, that has its own tax revenues. And basically, another part of what we do here is the analytics for others that are involved in project development activity that may result in public-private partnerships. So we've invented a new capital planning tool that this commission in Hampton Roads is using to run scenarios on basically which of these multiple tunnel, bridge, and other projects should go forward, and how they should go forward, and how they would connect and work as a system going forward. Next. This tool allows them to have a systems view, which is really important in terms of transportation. It's not just a project, it's a system you're trying to put in place. And you can see using these various inputs or outputs, you can work through scenarios, a lot of different scenarios. You'll see the result next. You're not supposed to be able to read this, but this is a level of detail about what you can do project by project as well as the whole. It involves cash flow, actual construction cost estimates, scheduling, other kind of things, so you can have a sense of what your alternatives are. And they're in that stage now of evaluating how that actually will work well. Next. And as Leon said, there are goals here. If I were to rank our goal, it's really to deliver, number one, deliver more quickly, especially where entities have limits on traditional tax revenue and bond revenue programs. Life cycle costs being included and sharing risks or others. And then the final point is we like bringing the private sector's financial discipline to the project selection and prioritization process. Again, each of these benefits has its own value, but we think P3s have the opportunity to bring them together. So that's kind of our experience so far. Next slide. There's my contact information, and we would be certainly willing to consult with each of you offline as well about how to get started, how to do better, and what's next. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug, for your excellent presentation. Russell, you have the floor now.
Thank you very much. Why don't we go ahead and go to the next slide, and we'll just get kicked off here. Thought I'd start off by a little bit of history on TxDOT's program. We actually did our first design build project in 2002, and we actually had legislation as far back as 1991 to do design build or alternate delivery type projects. It wasn't until 2003 though that we truly got our ability to do our concession contracts, and since that point in time we've moved forward with a number of projects. As a matter of fact, at one point the legislature thought we were moving a little too quickly, so they actually put a they slowed us down with some legislation and put a hold on projects. But then, starting in 2011, they opened up the valve a little bit and gave us the ability to move things forward with the concession contracts, with the caveat that there had to be local stakeholder involvement and concurrence prior to us moving forward with concession-type projects. In 2013, they amended that legislation, and as things stand today, we're authorized to build 22 CDA or concession-type projects. In 2013, they also gave us the ability to do non-tolled projects. When we first started our program, CDAs or concession projects were concurrent with the word tolls. So anybody that's starting one of these programs, I would recommend that you not necessarily link the two together if you don't have to. As you can imagine, toll roads are always controversial. Concession projects are always controversial to the degree until people understand them and get by the learning curve. When you throw both of them together, you've got a much harder lift to actually make that project successful. The other thing that our legislature added was in our concession projects was they required us to include a buyout provision, which gave us basically a formula to buy the projects out at any point in time along the way. so that we weren't necessarily trapped into a long-term deal if something changed and we needed to do something else in that corridor. Next slide. In Texas, we actually have two types of B3 legislation. The first is a design, build, operate, maintain legislation, or DBOM, which gives us the ability, as you can see there on the slide, to do design build projects, but also to put a long-term maintenance tail on it. Those maintenance tails can go up to 25 years. They don't necessarily have to include maintenance, but we are limited to 3 projects per year until September 1st, 2015, which is obviously just around the corner, and then at that point the limit comes off and we can procure as many of those as appropriate. At this point, there's also a limit that the projects must be at least $50 million or more for us to use design build on. The other legislation that we have is called comprehensive development agreements, which for practical purposes is what we call our P3 legislation. It is it allows us to do basically the same thing as our design, build, operate, maintain, our DBOM legislation allows, with one caveat, or one addition. It allows us to use private financing in the form of a revenue risk concession. We do not have the ability to do what the industry commonly calls availability payments at this time. It would also allow us to do gap financing, which we call a DBOM with a little f, if you will. Gap financing is, for lack of a better term, deferred construction payments, where we spread the cost of the project out over, say, the last 5 years, or 5 years after completion to pay everything off. Just primarily we use it as a cash flow tool. Next slide. In 2015, we're pushing forward for a couple things, but first and foremost, as many of you know, there's been a discussion which is actually the cumulation of a 3-year effort by the DOT and a lot of legislatures and the AGC to educate the public on the need for additional transportation spending. We recently received in November, approval of a constitutional amendment with an 80% majority to allow us to tap into the state's rainy day fund, if you will, and provide a portion of those funds for transportation, which will basically provide an additional $1.7 billion per year. Well, for the first year anyway. After that, it'll depend on basically how the oil and gas prices fluctuate. So next year, if oil and gas prices stay down to where they are presently at below $60 a barrel, it could be substantially less than that. The other things we're pushing for, and none of that money, by the way, can be used for toll roads in any form or fashion. The legislature is also looking at providing additional funding for transportation. Governor-elect Abbott has indicated several places that he is one of his priorities will be to help us with additional transportation resources as we move forward. Other potential legislation is getting some additional CDA type projects, or having our DBOM legislation allowing us to do finance directly as a portion of that. We're also the only state agency and actually the only public agency, I believe, in the state that doesn't have the ability to do construction management at risk. or construction management, general contracting. So we're asking for that. And then we're also pushing forward with an innovative rail agreement legislation, which basically allows us to do concession-type rail projects. Next. To get an idea of the size of our program, right now we're running just a little under $28 billion. About half of the projects we completed to date have been pure concession revenue risk concession projects, and the rest have pretty much been design, build, operate, and maintain projects. We do see a trend. Revenue risk projects are getting more and more difficult to do, so we're starting to do, and actually as a state we're leaning more and more towards design, build, operate, and maintain, and hopefully again using design, build, operate, maintain with a deferred construction payment, so gap financing, if you will. Presently in the pipeline we have about $7.9 billion in kind of in pre-procurement and active procurements, projects which are on the street right now. RFQs have been issued. We're running about $3.6 billion with $10 billion under construction, and we have about $6.1 billion actually in operations and maintenance at this point in time, and we've been very successful on that. Next slide. When you look at our current projects and our future projects, and I apologize, you probably can't read this map really well, but most of our current projects have been in metropolitan areas. There's a few of them in El Paso, down in the valley, and we've actually bundled a number of projects together in the energy sector in South Texas. We bundled 31 projects together and made one big project. Those are ongoing right now, and then our future projects are basically in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, the Austin area, the San Antonio area, and the Houston area. Those are what we have on the books right now and are tracking. Next slide. Just some lessons learned that I think are pretty critical, and what's made our program successful. First off, these projects are a complete paradigm shift, and getting our people as well as our consultants, and even to a degree the contractors, trained up on them has been critical. We've got a great relationship with the AGC here in Texas, and we've worked very hard with joint training programs, and it's been one of our shining accomplishments, I think, to put that training program together, and we actually are able to bring it's co-taught by both TxDOT and AGC members, and before we put people on any of our design build projects, or concession projects, they go to that training, and the contractors use it in the same way. So it's been pretty, I can't say enough about getting people trained up and helping to break that paradigm. From a partnering perspective, I can't say enough about the project specific. That primarily occurs in the one-on-one meetings. I equate that to dating. You're building relationships, you're learning how each other is going to work, and meeting one-on-one with contractors on specific projects or developers on specific projects is critical to the success of the project. Again, from a general industry standpoint, AGC has been very helpful in moving the project forward, and we could not have done it without their support, obviously. We see a lot of innovation on these projects. Typically, we see these projects coming in at 10 to 20% below our engineer's estimate. Most of that comes from innovation which is being introduced into these contracts, and primarily in the form of alternate technical concepts, people bringing new ideas in, and then getting our people to say, well, no, we're not going to do it like that because we've never done it like that before in Texas. It's critical that people on these projects have the right frame of mind, and when you create that opportunity, the results as far as project savings are dramatic. The other thing I'll say about lessons learned, and you can see them over there on the right side of the screen, but the thing that I think most owners do too much of is they over-design the project before they give it to the developer or the concessionaire to start. Don't over-design it. Focus on the risk items. That's how you bring the cost down. Focus on the geotechnical, the right-of-way, the survey, the drainage, any potential hazardous materials. If you do that and provide them with 10 to 20% plans, basically enough plans that you were able to go get the environmental clearance taken care of, that's more than enough. If you provide them much more than that, you really start to stifle creativity and their ability to innovate. Last slide, please. You know, when we look at these projects, and especially concession projects today, there's a lot of challenges out there, and we've through a lot of it through hit and miss, a lot of it through advice of others who have gone before us. We kind of found solutions that we've been using. For transparency and accountability, you can never go too far there. We make sure all our documents are published on our website, so anybody who's interested can go in and get to those documents and see what our agreements actually say. There's always the concern of loss of public control, but the thing to remember is the state owns the projects. These are just simply lease agreements. Toll rates on a concession project are always established by our commission, and then we use that stakeholder committee to be sure that, you know, if the locals don't want a concession project, we don't build a concession project. You know, they have to ask and they have to vote, and by vote I mean the stakeholder committee, which by law is set up with certain members of the community, MPO, county, and such. As far as profits go, you know, profit is a nasty word in the public sector, but you know, we set the maximum payment curves for the initial deals if we're participating financially. We also set revenue caps and maximum toll rates that they can charge. And if projects are really doing well, TxDOT receives a share of the revenue. So it doesn't just all become a big windfall for a concessionaire. As far as the bankruptcy goes, risk of bankruptcy, there's been a lot of discussion as of late of what happens. Well, you know, frankly, the way the deals are set up is we're not involved in the financing. If a concessionaire should go into bankruptcy, you know, the probability or the financial institutions that are backing that concessionaire are going to keep that road open, because that's the only mechanism they have for recapturing their investment. In addition to that, TxDOT has the ability, if they walk away from it, we can assume it pretty much, so that it's not like they can barricade it off and just leave town. The other thing, as far as buyouts go, you know, we do put a formula in case we want to terminate and do a private buyout. Typically, it's the greater of the fair market value or the outstanding debt, if that were to happen. We don't have any reason to believe that it would happen, and obviously those would be some pretty significant numbers if it were to happen. But anyway, with that, I'll wrap up and available for any questions.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you, Russell, for that astute presentation. We have several questions. Before I go to the questions, just want to let you all know that all the PowerPoints from the presenters will be on both the SLC website and also the CSG Knowledge Center website. The first question goes to Leon. What was the payment type for the Florida P3s?
Yeah, so our design, build, finance, operate, maintain projects have been availability payment projects, and that's basically we have some either construction period or just after construction period payments, but then we have long-term availability payments that go over the 30 or 35-year operations and maintenance period of the contract.
Thank you, Leon. Another question, and maybe Doug might want to take this. Do you know of any state that allows local jurisdictions to use P3 procurement without state oversight? I'm not sure what the story with Virginia is on that count, or if you might be able to address that.
Yeah, definitely. Many of our local government jurisdictions and even some of our universities have used public-private partnerships for facilities. Basically, what the state serves in that respect is to give them a starting point with the guidelines that we have. They're often adopted to reflect local or regional specific conditions, but I think that's one of the big things that the state can do is by providing a set of guidelines as a starting point, plus some expertise and technical assistance, it can help localities sort of get over that hump of we're not quite sure how to go about doing these. So our largest jurisdictions are the ones usually that have taken advantage, things like Fairfax County, which is population 1.2 million.
Excellent. Thank you, Doug. Finally, a question for Russell. Does Texas use P3s for water and sewer infrastructure projects?
At this point, I'm not yes, they do, but since they wouldn't fall to the TxDOT's jurisdiction, we wouldn't really track those projects.
Okay. Let's see, we have a couple of more minutes. One more question here. Risk of bankruptcy, how does Florida and Virginia handle this challenge? I know Russell mentioned a little bit about the bankruptcy issue. I don't know if Leon and Doug want to address that with regard to their two states.
Yeah, I'd be glad. We've had a couple of those in Virginia, actually. There were a couple of our smaller projects. In that case, we simply wait for the private sector to restructure. Usually a new buyer or owner or operator, a new operator comes in. The facilities in the interim are continue to be operated under an interim agreement. So the public benefit of these things continues even if the private sector itself is restructuring on the financing side.
Okay. Leon, do you want to add anything to that?
Sure. And I think one thing I would point out is we try to mitigate some of that risk of bankruptcy as far as toll revenue risk, and with the availability payments, the department's retaining the toll revenue risk. But the same I would have the same answer as Doug did, that basically we would look to see if the lenders and the private sector is going to step in, but ultimately it would be our project, and like he said, the public benefit of the project is still there.
Very good. We are running out of time and have to wrap up this webinar, but please forward any questions you have to me, and I will work on getting you a response from the presenters. Thank you once again to our speakers today for their contributions, and to my CSG colleague, Carrie Abner, for her help with all the technical aspects. Thank you to all of you for spending an hour of your afternoon with us, and I hope you found this webinar useful and informative. If there's anything more that CSG or SLC can do for you in your policy work, please don't hesitate to contact us. Have a great afternoon.